Sota DAF Mem Tet Amud Aleph Amud Bet. Humility lo titni anava de'ika ana. Talking about humility in general terms, and humility is today recognized as one of the most important capacities of effective leadership. But interestingly, until about 5 years ago, it was never taught or talked about in leadership. About 5 years ago, a professor from London University by the name of Dan Cable started writing about humility in leadership, and Brené Brown from Houston started doing a fortune of work in the area of vulnerability. These were terms that were never used in association with leadership, because leadership was always thought of having to require, which it does, assertiveness and confidence. And people saw humility and vulnerability as capacities somewhat undermining of confidence and assertiveness. But what's important is to understand, certainly Al-Pi Torah, according to the Torah, what does humility mean? And how do we utilize humility? How do we operate with humility without compromising confidence and assertiveness, which are also principles we have in the midot of the Torah, the idea of tkifut hadat, of being able to be firm and decisive and directive and to be able to stand up for what you believe in. Humility is certainly not meekness. And it's because in the West, humility has always been thought about as a kind of meekness, that it hasn't been able to be incorporated into the curriculum of leadership training and business schools until very, very recently. Today, by going through a very disturbing piece of Gemara that describes our current era and makes us think a little bit, leading us into the last line of the Masechta. We finished Masechta Sota today, and the last line where Rav Yosef and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak say things that are wild on the surface. And using a principle of the Beis Halevi in this Gemara, the Brisker Rov explains what Rav Yosef means. And from that we'll understand what humility is. So let's have a look at the Gemara. The Gemara, we start with the Mishnah on Mem Tet Amud Bet at the bottom, where the Mishnah says, from the time that Rebbe passed away, Mishemet Rebbe Batel Anava V'yirat Chet. From the time that Rabbi Yehuda Anasi died, we're talking about the year 200, there was no more humility and true yirat chet, true fear of God. Those were two ideas that ceased to exist in the world after Rebbe. You didn't have it. And the Gemara goes on at the very bottom of Amud Aleph, Rabbi Lezer HaGodol Omer. Rabbi Lezer HaGodol was Rabbi Lezer ben Hurkunus, who was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And Rabbi Lezer ben HaGodol says, Miyom shecharav Beit HaMikdash, from the day that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, Sharu Chakimaya Lemevi Kesafraya. The true intellectual giants of Torah began to be like school teachers. So we didn't have that gigantic intellect that you used to have before the destruction of the temple. After the destruction of the temple, they became like school teachers. That was already the height of scholastic achievement, was somebody who had the knowledge that previously would have been fit for a school teacher. V'safraya kechazanaya. And the school teachers became like chazonim. So we'll see what that, like cantors in the shul, we'll see what that's got to do with anything. The chazanaya ke'amad aran. What about the chazonim? They became like amaratzim. They were ignoramuses. They didn't have anything. The Amadara and the Amaratzim, even them, as Lavidaldala, they got lower and lower level. Even the Amaratzim the new Amaratzim weren't even of the caliber of the Amaratzim of old. Ve'en shoel, ve'en mevakesh. Nobody looks for Torah. Nobody's in search of the truth. Al mi yesh li shein. At times like this, on who can we rely? Al avinu shebashamayim. You've got to relate to Hashem and build a connection with Hashem, because the world's in a sorry state. And the Mishnah goes on and talks about be'ikvete de Mashiach, in the time before the Mashiach comes, which we believe is the time of now. Does that mean we're 50 years away from Mashiach coming, 2 years away from Mashiach coming, 200 years away? We don't know, but in historical terms, this is the period prior to the Mashiach coming, and it's called Ikvete de Mashiach. What do we have in the time of Mashiach coming? Chutzpah Yaska. Now just look at these descriptions and see the period of history we're talking about. Chutzpah Yaska, there'll be a lot of chutzpah in the world. Ve'yokar Yamir, and there will be inflation in the world. Hagefen titen pirya v'ayayin beyoker, even though there's plenty of vines around and grapes are being produced, but wine is expensive. Umalchut tehapech leminut, and governments will become secular liberals. Ve'ein tochachat, and there's nobody who will get up and give tochacha. The rabbis won't say the truth, and the teachers won't say the truth, and parents won't tell their children the truth. People will be afraid to confront one another with the truth and to challenge one another, because everybody gets offended. The moment you say anything that's in the slightest bit confrontational, people get offended. And then you get cancelled, and then you get sidelines, so people don't do it. Ein tochachat, there's no tochacha. All you'll find on social media is how wonderful everybody is, how great everybody is, how accomplished everybody is. That's all you'll see. You won't see tochacha on the social media or anywhere other than in politics. V'chochmot sofrim tisrach, and the wisdom of Talmidei Chachomim will become cheap. V'yirei chet yemasu, and yirei chet, people who are God-fearing people, will despise midot. The Mefarshim explain, they won't want to develop their character, they won't want to work on themselves. Musar will not be in vogue among the scholars of the time. V'haemet tehei ne'ederet, and the truth will disappear. The quest for truth will become less and less. Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Na'aset adarim adarim. It'll be found in small little groups. You'll go to the big places where there are lots of people and thousands of people and crowds and masses of followers on social media. That's not where you're going to find the emes. People don't want the emes, as we'll see in Rebellia Dessler later on at the end. People want entertainment. They want theater. They don't want emes. It's not about emes ne'ederet. Na'arim pnei zakenim yalbinu. Young people will embarrass the older people. Zakenim yamdu mipnei ktanim. Older people will stand up in front of younger people. The owners of unicorns could be 35 years old, and a 70-year-old will stand up and show him a great deal of honor. Pnei hador ki pnei hakelev. The leaders of the generation will be like the leadership of a dog, which Rabbi Salante explained that the dog's always in front of the owner. But when you get to a crossroad, the dog runs ahead and then looks over his shoulder to see where the owner's going, and then he comes back and he runs in front of the owner again. He's not really leading the way. He checks the polls all the time. He sees what the people want, and then he tells the people what they want. That's what it is. It's the time of leading by polls. Children are not ashamed in front of parents. So where's this all going? You're going to have to rely on Hashem, because society is in a state of decline. So that's the Gemara, and we'll see why that's relevant. Then at the end of the Masechta, the way the Masechta closes off is Mishimet Rebbe B'Tela Navavi Radchet Amale Rav Yosef Latana. Rav Yosef, when this Gemara was being learnt, Rav Yosef got up and he said, "Don't say that. Lo titni anova." Don't include in the things that have disappeared, don't include humility. T'ika ana. Because can't you see I'm still alive? Okay. Omale Rav Nachman Natana, and Rav Nachman got up and he said, Lo titni yirat chet. Don't talk about yirat chet as one of the things that's disappeared. T'ika ana, can't you see I'm around? And that's how the Masechta ends. That's the end of this wonderful Masechta Sota. Asks the Marsho, where do we see this, that Chachomim get up and brag about their greatness, particularly where their greatness is humility? It just doesn't make any sense. And various people give various different answers to it, but I wanted to include this piece at the end of the Chidushim of the Brisker Rov. So you remember the Brisker Rov died in the 1950s. He was the Rov of Brisk in Europe, the son of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, the grandson of the Beis Halevi, the father of one of my Rabbeim, Reb Meir Soloveitchik. And in the Sefer that they brought out of his shiurim, of the Brisker Rov shiurim on Sota, at the very end, the Brisker Rov used to give a shiur on this piece of Gemara based on his grandfather's drush. What did his grandfather say? And I've included the whole thing because part of the purpose of the Matmonim is that you've got this, that the people, whether it's you guys or it's people who are listening in, that if or others who are not listening, at some time you want to work on this Gemara, or you want to work on one of these ideas, we're working on the website being able to be searchable. So if you're looking at a concept, humility, you'll be able to search for humility, and then you'll have this Brisker Rov and this Beis Halevi will come, because the Beis Halevi isn't published in the Beis Halevi, it was published in a journal, and the Brisker Rov brings it. So the Beis Halevi says it's natural in the world that you don't brag about something which, if you don't have, is a serious impediment. So you don't brag about the fact that you're not lame. You don't brag about the fact that you're not blind. Because that's the norm. The norm is people can see. If one is, God forbid, blind, then that's like Rav Yosef was. Then that's something to be concerned about. That's something to be upset about. If one is lame, that if you're healthy, you're normal, you don't brag about it. You don't brag about that which is normal. Because that's the norm. But if you've got a person like Reb Simon here, who the Rebbeinu Shalom has graced with a beautiful voice, and with musical sensitivity and accuracy, and he can inspire crowds of people with the voice that he's got, with that talent. We, the rest of us sitting over here, don't feel inadequate because we can't sing like Simon. We're just proud of Simon, but the fact that we can't do that, it's okay, we can do other things. It doesn't make us feel less. It's not as if there's something wrong with you because you're not a talented musician. Therefore, somebody who is a talented musician, that's something worthy of praising. So you talk about it, you say, Simon is a wonderful chazan, he's a musician, he's an unbelievably talented person. But you don't say, and Dr. Howard here is amazing, he's got eyesight. And Steve here can walk on 2 feet and he knows how to stand up. And so we don't say that, that's normal. We only praise people about that which is not normal. Says the Beis Halevi. The same applies to Torah. During the time that Yisrael was at their heights, and the Shechina was there. We learned yesterday about the quality of learning Torah when we were gaining energy from the Beis Hamikdash itself. A Talmid Chacham was no big deal. Everybody was a Talmid Chacham. It was normal to be a Talmid Chacham. Everybody knew the whole Torah. Everybody knew the Torah, nothing to be proud of. If there was somebody who didn't know Torah, he was called an Amoritz, he was considered far inferior. But the times have changed. This is the Beis Halevi writing in the 19th century already. It's no longer so serious to be an Amoritz. Yeah, people don't have sleepless nights over the fact that they're an Amoratzim. And if you find somebody who knows a few little things, he can say a vort on Friday night at the table. He can say something from the Parsha. And now he thinks himself as a Rav, as a Talmid Chacham, because he knows a little bit of Torah. He can Google something and he can say something over. He can look up one of the Sforim. He can quote what somebody says. Oh, it's Talmid Chacham. Even if he knows what children at Cheder know, nowadays that's already considered a mailer. Somebody just yesterday came to see me and was just complaining in a certain part of the world about the level of the droshes of the Rabbonim. And it's a problem sometimes when Rabbonim don't put enough time into preparing a drosha, that they're sometimes infantile, they're sometimes childish. The Rabbonim are repeating things that you can get on Google. It's not chokhmah, you're not learning things that make you look at the world differently. And he was complaining about that. That's what the Beis Halevi is talking about already 150 years ago. Wow, listen, shikeach. People say out to shikeach. Yishkeach what? The person said a little word that a Cheder child can say. Yishkeach. That's a yishkeach. What's yishkeach? We're not discerning. It makes no difference. And we'll see in a moment why not. And he goes on, Vayidiyahu yitaronu mithalel af biyidiyam mu'etet batorah chumo he'edei yicholet ha'adam liyot menagen u'meshoreh asher gam bo ein chisaron machmat shakol yodim shirach matei ma'at v'yichidei sgula yodim lenagen. Then the Briskerov adds, Al derech zeh yesh lefaresh, and using that principle, we can understand, and by the way, that's how he explains that Gemara, and he says, the Chachomim become like the Cheder teachers, and the Cheder teachers become like the Chazonim. What does that mean? A Chazan's got a unique talent that was given to him by Hashem. That's something worth praising. So now the Talmidei Chachomim praise themselves as if they're Chazonim, as if they're talented, as if they've got something unique. But it's nothing unique. There's nothing to be proud of. Everybody should be a Talmid Chacham. A Chazan's got a reason to be proud. He's got something that other people don't have. But a Talmid Chacham, everybody's got. So that's how he learns that. And now comes the Briskerov and says, what about this comment of Rav Yosef? How can you say there's no humility? Look at me, I'm still alive. He explains the kavanat Rav Yosef ayad d'chashem she'en shvachu la'adam in eino suma o chiger. Just as you don't praise yourself if you're not blind. You don't praise yourself if you're not lame. Don't say, look at me, I'm amazing, I can walk. But you don't praise yourself about not being imperfect. Anava does not mean not knowing your value. Here you've got the definition of humility. First, let's know what humility isn't. Humility does not mean I don't understand how amazing I am. No, I can understand how amazing I am. There's an Avnei Nezer that talks about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu writes in the Sefer Torah that there's nobody as humble as Moshe. So of course he knows that. You're allowed to know that. That doesn't detract from your humility. Rak anav eino machzik tova la'atzmo. What is humility? Humility is not taking credit for your anova or for your talents and abilities. Realizing it's not really you. That's what you're meant to be. You're humble. Of course you're humble. Everybody's meant to be humble. If you've learned a lot of Torah, you're a big Talmud Chacham, don't take credit for it. That's your job. That's like somebody that does their job and wants a bonus because they just did their job. You just did your job. A bonus is for going beyond that. You're a Talmud Chacham. You know the whole Torah. That's what you're meant to know. That's the minimum. There's nothing to get excited about. If one doesn't know the Torah, one is a Baal Mum, something's missing. And so if you are a humble person, that's nothing to be proud of. Being a humble person is like saying, I know how to breathe. I know how to walk. That's all it is. It's normal. That's how one's meant to be. Meaning, don't say that there are no humble people around. It's normal to be humble. Everybody's humble. Rabbi Yosef couldn't imagine somebody who's not humble. Humility was something so normal to him. He says, even I'm humble. Humility is the normal state. Nothing to be proud of, nothing to gloat about, the fact that one is humble. That's the definition of anova. Anova is not I hakarat erech atzmo. Anova does not mean not knowing your worth. Anova means knowing my worth but not taking credit for it. I know my worth, but that's standard, that's normal, that's the minimum I'm meant to have. We'll end with the piece from the Michtav Meliyahu from Rabbi Lapin, where he writes about our generation. He's writing in the 1950s, but look how contemporary it is. He writes about this piece of Gemara. Dorenu hu dor chitzoni. Our generation is a generation that is obsessed with that which is outside of them, with that which is superficial. Hadavek bechitzoniot belo tochen pnimi. That is attached to superficiality without internal depth. Dor shekol tovotav shelo lishma. Dor shekol alamot teatron. A generation whose whole world is entertainment. V'chol ma'asav mischakim. And what they do is game. They play. Everything is about play and about gaming. Dor shekol machshuvatav dimayon. And so he goes on. And that's the period in which we're living. And what have we got to do? Al mi yesh lishayin al avinu shebashamayim. What we have to be able to do is each of us establish our connection to the Rebbeinu Shem directly, to the pursuit of truth, to the understanding of truth, to the understanding of who we are and what we're capable of, but not for taking huge credit for that understanding. Lekach notzarta. That's what we're created to do and to achieve.